So good afternoon, everyone. I don't want to embarrass you, but I would call you, as the Rebbe called you, Noshim Tzidkanias, the righteous women of our generation. All women, but especially those on the forefront, the pioneers. I'd like to begin with a story that I have never really shared in public, but I think it really can set the tone for the discussion here this afternoon. So I had the privilege for many years to write, well, first to memorize and to write the Rebbe's Farbrengens. Each of them was a feat of their own. Now, in the later years, approximately around 1985-86, Memvov Memzayin, the Rebbe began editing more extensively the Farbrengens that he was delivering. Up till that point, it was more sporadic. Then it became almost a weekly event, which of course was great for everyone. Until this day, we have these edited sikhs. So we had a deadline, Tuesday night, to give the Rebbe the sikha, which means we had Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, including Motzei Shabbos, to prepare a fully annotated and a full version of the Farbrengen, which was not an easy thing to do because some of these Farbrengens were 3-4 hours long, sometimes even longer. But Tuesday night was the deadline, approximately 11 o'clock at night, because that's when the Rebbe would go home in those years. So we had till 11 p.m. Tuesday, the last time the secretary would go into the Rebbe and we would give the Rebbe the sikha. And usually Wednesday morning when the Rebbe returned to 770, which was usually around 12 o'clock, a little earlier on Mondays and Thursdays the Rebbe would come for Kriyas HaTorah, so it was 10 o'clock. But on Wednesday it was around 12, and the Rebbe would give us back the sikha edited. Now, as always, as we all know, the art of procrastination, even though it was still 3 days, but we were always right to the deadline, 11 o'clock. But sometimes it was 11:15. So we had a second plan B, which we could only use as last resort, and that was the Rebbe went home. So for another 45 minutes till around 11:45, we had the second opportunity to bring it to the Rebbe's house. But that was, of course, more complicated because I had to call Schollenberg Gansberg, who used to work in the Rebbe's house, and go to the back door. I don't know if you're familiar with the setup there. And he would take the sikha, and if it was around till 11:45, 12, he can give it to the Rebbe. After that, we never missed that deadline, So what I would do is I'd call. He had a phone in the kitchen in the Rebbe's house. I would call the number. He would answer, and I'd say, "I'm bringing over the sikha," and he would open the door in the back, take it, and fine. Well, as luck would have it, one Tuesday night, I think it was Toshim Mem Zayin, I don't remember which week it was. So who answers the phone? The Rebbetzin. The Rebbetzin Chaya Mushke. Yesterday was Chav Beishvat. And the Rebbetzin answered. I didn't want to hang up the phone on her. It's not nice. Middle of the night, it's a private number. Nobody has that number. To hang up would be not respectful. On the other hand, I wasn't interested in having a conversation either, obviously. But so what did I do? So I said, Anshuldik was a Chrufa Zeishpet. And I'll translate. I'm sorry for calling so late, but I was calling for Shalom Begansberg, who usually answers the phone, to bring him I didn't say what. No, actually, he usually answers the phone. And the Rebbe says to me, I'll tell you exactly the way she said it, so this was our conversation. She says to me, which could have also meant an emergency. Because you're calling so late, probably it's an important thing. So beat the zog, was rufst du? Okay, at that point, I had to say, so I told her my name, and I said, I work in the sikhs, and sometimes when we have an opportunity, you can't give it to the Rebbe, the sikha, I bring it to him, 11:30. She says, ganz bakant. She says, I'm quite aware. She says, nu bring it over. So I said, ich will nicht mal trier sein der Rebbetzin. Ich will bald zurückrufen und ich will reden mit Schollenberg. She says, nicht kein trier, das ist der größte Schuss von mir. It's not a trouble or bother, it's the greatest honor of mine. Okay. Then she says to me the following words. She says, Du arbeitest dort auf dem dritten Stock, wo sie brennt die Licht die ganze Nacht. You work there on the third floor of the building where we worked, where the light burns all night. That's what she said. So I said, yeah, because our office is the closest office, and if you know the office is over 770, So there's two buildings between 770 till Kingston. So their office is up there. My office, all the years, going back 40 years, was the windows go straight to the Frierdiker Rebbe's apartment and the Rashag's apartment, which was on the third floor. So the Rebbetzin clearly would see our offices all the time, because whenever she came there, to her mother, earlier years, and later years to her sister. So I said, yeah. So she says, nu, ich soll im Bett zugegangen, dort helfen, verrichten etwas in der Plumbing. Kannst du gucken im Fenster, darfst du sehen im Chappen dort. She said, Schoenberg Gansberg went there to fix a plumbing problem. So you could look through the window and see, I don't know why I said this, but this is what I said. Entschuldigt, aber es ist nicht bequem gucken bei jenem im Fenster. You know, not that we never did, but I said, it's not so comfortable to look to someone's window. She says, mach nicht das, doesn't matter. Anyway, I looked, the lights were off, so I said, no, I don't think anyone's there. Anyway, the bottom line is I did what she had said. I came to the house. He was already back into the house. So he opened the door and took the sikh. This is my Rebbetzin story. Now, I have other stories as well, but the focus on the agenda here. Now, I always thought, Rebbetzin is not just another person. Every word is measured. Especially, we don't have many stories about the Rebbetzin firsthand. There are a lot of Baba Maises, but there's not many accurate stories. So, I was thinking about it. As soon as I hung up the phone, I said, where did I hear that expression once, that the light burns all night? You all know where it comes from, probably. We say it every Friday night in Eishas Chayil. Lesichva, Balayla, Nero. Mamish, the words that the Rebbetzin used. That the light does not go out by her, by the Eishas Chayil, by the woman of valor, at night. That was the Rebbetzins expression. And I've been thinking about it ever since, going back now. What are we talking now? We're talking a good 30 years, almost 30 years ago. So I thought it's a great backdrop to discuss something which I think, as most things with the Rebbe, that we don't fully appreciate. I've been working in the Sikhs of the Rebbe my entire life. I can tell you, even today, I constantly find things that amaze me. Not because I never heard it before, because another nuance, something you'd missed. And to appreciate a Rebbe, the caliber of a Rebbe, usually when he's right in your face, it's not always easy to do that. You get blinded by the sun. But when you step back and review it again and again, you find tremendous innovation, and especially for our generation. So I want to talk about the feminine revolution that the Rebbe pioneered, because it's exactly what he did. There are many things that the Rebbe continued what the Rabbeim before did. Obviously all the things, teaching Chassidus, Temchet Mimim. But there are things that Rebbe initiated that you do not find in the 6 Rabbeim before that. And one of them is to turn women into leaders. I want to talk about that and give a little back. Obviously it can't be a thorough analysis of it all, but at least some highlights, which you may be familiar with, but maybe not entirely. And especially you see the consistency, and in retrospect you can see the big picture. And these words of the Rebbetzin, as you'll see, actually capture it in a very powerful way. Why of all things, the Shlema Melech in Mishlei, in Eishas Chayil, laud the woman for her light not going out at night. But Pashtus, it means that she's always there, like the guardian. She's protecting, she's watching, even when everyone is asleep. But it has many more meanings than that. Okay, so where we begin? Let's begin from the beginning. Right from the Rebbe's outset, the outset of the Rebbe's Nesius leadership, he immediately began talking in every major Farbrengen and never stopped. All the way till 1992 when the Rebbe had the stroke. There was no one major Farbrengen that the Rebbe did not dedicate either an entire Sikha or partial Sikha to women. Not every Shabbos, I would say, but every major Farbrengen. So when you look back, you see that it was consistent. It wasn't like, it happened, it was a random thing. Quite deliberate. And what did the Rebbe do? When he first established the Shei of Neis Chabad, even before really Shlichus began to emerge, the Rebbe made it very clear he doesn't want women just to take care of their homes and their children and their husbands, but in addition to that, which is their primary role, Akeres Habayis, they should also be active in the community, wherever they would be, and they should be partners with their husbands in whatever the respective mission that each family would have. In the beginning, as usual was with the Rebbe would say things. So firstly, as I heard from Chassidim from those years, I wasn't around yet, but I heard that everybody never understood the Rebbe till he had to say it 5, 6, 10 times, maybe sometimes more than that. Many, many things. Because we have no context. The Rebbe's Farbrengens and the Rebbe's approach was completely different than what was until then. Not just the Rebbe as a Rebbe, but also the times were different. You have to remember, 1950, and it's critical to understand, every Nasi is Lefi Hadar, Parnas Lefi Hadar, a leader is according to his community. 1950 was right after World War II, 5 years. The Chabad community was barely existent. They were running from Russia, Europe, post-World War II. There was such upheaval. Who the Rebbe was speaking to, I don't know if you know, the Farbrengens maybe had 40 people. And they didn't speak English, and they had no parnasa, and many of their families were, who knows where, some were killed in the whole process. You're talking about a broken nation, a broken people. On the other hand, it was the first time that a Rebbe would be in the United States, living in a free country, not in a time of war. And we didn't know where it's going. But the Rebbe was dealing with a challenge different than the Frierdiker Rebbe. Frierdiker Rebbe was dealing with Gzeirus. First in Russia, then in Europe, and even in America, it was still middle of World War II and all the other challenges. The Rebbe was beginning a leadership that would affect a free world. So there were all new types of challenges. Which maybe, just to speculate, is why the Rebbe Taka initiated what I'm calling the feminine revolution. The Rebbe's actual Asius, as I'll soon quote. And he began very deliberately, in a very methodical way, to establish, besides the other mezes, besides the other plans the Rebbe had, the woman's role. He made it very clear, again and again. And I can tell you off the record, there were quite a number of people who, when they heard about it, they saw the Rebbe meant it seriously, were troubled by it, because it was the not traditional role. Just like there were people troubled by shlichus in general, because it was unheard of. It's one thing you send a shliach, a few 10, 15, 20, in a time of danger or challenges. But the Rebbe became clear as the years rolled on that the Rebbe meant it seriously. He wanted everyone to be a shliach and a shluch. And there were people that didn't understand. And I'm not suggesting necessarily someone questioning the Rebbe, but still, people didn't understand what the Rebbe's plan was. Because it went against 2,000 years of Jewish history. After the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the goal of Eden was to try to build communities, not to disperse them. We were dispersed in Golos. So wherever Jews came, like the expression, Teli Yavne V'Chachamel, was to build a strong Jewish community with a shul, with a Beis Medrash, with a yeshiva, with a mikveh, whatever is necessary in a Jewish community. Not in that order, obviously. And that was the goal, that Jews came together. And here the Rebbe was suddenly sending people away. And we weren't talking about 10,000 Chassidim living in Crown Heights. You're talking about a few, small numbers, and the Rebbe is already sending them. And especially focusing on the leadership of women, it was unprecedented. Chinuch there was already a Beis Yaakov, and the Rebbe brings in the Sichos, which I'll also cite soon, how that changed in the 20th century, primarily not just in Chabad, basically in all Charedish communities, where even though once upon a time there were no girls' schools, started girls' schools. That was already existing, so the Beis Rivka fine. But to make women leaders was not considered to be a tzniusnik thing. It was not considered to be, with no precedent. So I'm not here, I don't have to fight for the Rebbe. The Rebbe is the leader, the Nasi, and all of us know that. But I want to explain what the Rebbe did, and we can appreciate it as in retrospect. The Rebbe, like a real visionary, which is the definition of a true Nasi B'Yisrael, doesn't just see the here and now, sees the big picture, anticipated and understood that one of the big challenges that's coming would be the issue of the women's role in society. So sometimes to appreciate the Rebbe and Teirach Chassidus B'chlal is good to see, by contrast, what was going on in the bigger secular world, which of course was impacting Jews as well. Maybe they should set up a little later, or this has to happen right now. Coordination. I guarantee you there's a man behind this plan, not a woman. So, what was going on in the larger world? The feminist revolution, what they call the feminine mystique, written by Betty Friedan, one of the Jewish leaders of the feminist movement, hadn't yet taken hold. But the seeds of it were taking very much hold. Things that would be happening in the 60s and the 70s and so on, obviously didn't just start in a vacuum. That the women of the world, and especially in the Western world in America, were beginning what they call rise. Now, I'm not saying whether it's Kedusha, coming from Kedusha or not, but by the Rebbe, everything has a lesson. Even the rebellion of the hippies for the Rebbe was a positive. He saw the chutzpah as being a chutzpah against the system, against the status quo, an opportunity to challenge the status quo of Golos. The same thing with the women. Whatever the motivation, or whether it was always pure and always good intentions and had good conclusions, not necessarily. But the motivation, the drive was very clear. They did not want to be treated like second-class citizens. They wanted to be treated as equals, intelligence, and many other ways, and actually demonstrated that we have many qualities that are actually superior to men. To use the language of these feminists, it was that the male hierarchy has dominated long enough, and it's time for the women to rise and to demonstrate that we are not only equal, but superior in many ways. Yes, it was not driven by let's build homes and families, and let us be demonstrate the world of modesty and so on. It was not driven by that. But the voice of the woman was very clear rising. And I'm not suggesting that the Rebbe was responding to that. On the contrary, she was preempting it and understanding that in our day and age, you will not be successful in a free society if the women don't have leadership roles. Obviously, al pi halacha, al pi chassidus, al pi teda, that goes without saying. Or maybe it doesn't go without saying, so I'm saying it. But clearly, it cannot just be a man's job. And throughout the Sikhs, starting from the 50s and the 60s, the Yuds, the Chofs, the Lameds, you'll find a few recurrent themes, which I'll repeat briefly. Number one is that when the Eibishter created Adam and Chava, what does it say? It didn't say he created man and woman. It says he created Adam, Nasa Adam, B'tzalmenu, Kidmusenu, Zachar Unekeva, Bara Esam. He created them as two equals, Zachar and Nekeva. That's the first statement in the Torah that describes a man and a woman. And actually, most interpretations are that they were like an androgynous creature, two halves of one whole. That's where the concept of soulmate comes from. That's the concept of plagufa, two halves of a whole. And then he separated them. What Chassidus Kabbalah could call Nesira. And then their mission is to reconnect and reunite the Tselem Elikim, which only the two of them together can recreate. And that's when Al-Kain Yaziv, and that's why a man will leave his house, and in some ways also a woman, in order to find the second half of his divine whole. That's briefly the psukim themselves. The Rebbe, citing this in many different sikhs, explains what this means is that the shlichus that the human being was given is a shlichus divided into two roles, equal partners. And both have a role to play, and they're actually two halves of one role. So then when it says that he put them in Gan Eden, la'avda, l'shamra, this is the role of a man and a woman. Now, the question is what those roles are. So I'm going to go back a little chassidus. The Rebbe explained this al pi chassidus. You know, before we became human beings on this earth, as you probably all learned, you know, the shtalshel mehen, it says in the Tanya, that everything evolves from a more spiritual state. So it first starts from the spiritual and it moves to the physical. So what is the root of the feminine and masculine energies? When we say the Eibishter's HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Zohar and Shechina is Nekeva, what does this mean exactly? We know God is neither male or female. So what does it exactly mean that it manifests in two forms? Sometimes compared to the sun and the moon, sometimes compared to Mashpia Mekabel, which by the way does not mean one gives and the other one receives. It's just two different ways, as you'll see how we give. So the Rebbe explains this in a number of Maimorim and Sikhs in context of men and women, and then turns it into a game plan. But I think it's important to understand the Rebbe's intelligence behind it, the theory behind it, before we talk about the game plan. So briefly, and I hope everybody here appreciates this, because the Rebbe, when he spoke to the women, he would often talk these type of concepts. And I can tell you without question that some of the deepest concepts of Chassidus were spoken to women. more than what he spoke to Farbrengens for men and women. But the Rebbe was malbishit and spoke in a language that was very seemingly deceptively simple. So once in a woman's sikha, I think it was in the Lamed Vav or Lamed Zayin, the Rebbe said the following words. The Rebbe started the sikha very simply. He says, Teire baleicht, the weg fayede zach was tut. The Teire illuminates the path for every person. And the Rebbe says that there's two ways the Torah illuminates. One is it tells you what to do to conquer the hostile world around you. I'm translating it, loosely translating it. And the second, it's a licht, a light, that tells you how to focus on your inner self. And the Rebbe says, so the Eibishter blessed that when a zocher nekeva bora yisam, the difference between male and female in energy level is that ish darke lichbesh, generally speaking, masculine energy is more aggressive energy, and therefore that's why a man is physically stronger. What's aggressive energy? Takes the raw elements of this world and tames them, weakens them. And then the woman, kfuda basmelach prima, her energy is internal, intimate energy, and she takes it and turns it into something that can be consumed, that can be beautified. And the Rebbe quotes a Gemara, where he quotes many, many sikhs. Chitim kaises. When a farmer is working and threshing the field, and he harvests grain, can you eat grain? The Gemara asks. No. He gives the grain to the woman, to his wife, and she turns it into flour, which you bake and turn into bread that can be eaten. Then the Gemara continues, Pishtan shalevish. Can a person wear flax or other type of materials that you pick from the fields? Again, no. He gives it, and the woman turns it into something that is refined, a garment for a child or for an adult. And with this, the Rebbe develops a profound concept in Chassidus that we call Atzmus Ein Sof. The Eibishter himself is beyond female and male, but he manifested. I say he, I should say it manifested, or whatever you want to call it, manifested in two types of eight energies. In the language of Chassidus, two types of Eid Ein Sof. One is legalis luzulose, one is to reveal yourself to another, and one is legalis la'atzme, to reveal yourself to yourself. And all of us, men and women, have these two energies. Because remember, there's an overlap. And this is not, we're not talking about the man and woman on earth, we're talking about male and feminine energy, masculine and feminine energy. Two divine energies. And what is the difference? One is expressive. Like when you speak to someone, you're expressing yourself. In this world, the only way to communicate is if you express yourself. But does that reflect who you are? And I remember once the Rebbe saying in a sikha, can anyone truly express themselves fully? Liba lepuma legalia. A person cannot express the deepest feelings in their heart. So the difference is, expressive energy is necessary to express, but intimate energy is necessary to be. And the Rebbe once said in a sikha in the early 60s, he talked about Ava, talked about the difference between male and female love. And he said, one is a verb and the other is a noun. One is a state of being and the other is an action. You know, you say love, you could say I love you as an action of love, or love is a state of love. And that's the difference. So ultimately, both are necessary. One is internal, intimate energy, and one is expressive energy. As I said, there's overlap. But Chassidus makes a whole fuss about these two types of energies and how they evolve, and they are the basis of the whole Seder Shtalshus. So in the highest levels, it's simply two divine forms. One God going outward, so to speak, godliness going outward, and one godliness going inward. When it finally becomes manifest in what we call a male and female Zachar Nekeva Bora Yisam, is the manifestation of these two forms of energy, with the obvious overlap. I can elaborate on this, but I hope Tam L'Chacham V'Yach Kameid, and you can take this and take it further. This is the basis of how the Rebbe sees, and Chassidus sees, and Torah sees Zachar Nekeva. It's actually the only way to really explain the Psukim and Bereshis anyway. Now, how does the Rebbe translate it? So I want to cite I think, one of the most fundamental sikhs of the Rebbe on this topic, and it's actually one of the last sikhs the Rebbe delivered. The last time he would speak about Chav Bei Shvat was on Chav Bei Shvat, Tov Shin Nun Beis, 1992. A month later, the Rebbe would have a stroke, so he would not speak any longer, Megashmis at least. The Chav Beishvat Sikha, the Rebbe then in turn gave it out. Some of you may be old enough to remember. The Rebbe gave out this lavender-covered Kavitz Chav Beishvat. It's called Kuntas B'cha Yevorech Yisrael, because Chav Beis is B'cha. And I had the schus to prepare that Kavitz, and also to write that Sikha about Chav Beishvat, and the Rebbe edited it. And you can see there, from the rare moments where the Rebbe did not reveal a lot about his feelings, you can see the tribute he pays to the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka, and in the process to every Jewish woman. And for the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, for us, are the model man and woman. And the Rebbe says there in the Sikha many things, in connecting Chav Beis to Yud Aleph. The Rebbe's Yud Aleph Nissen. Chav Beis is twice Yud Aleph, the Rebbe says. And he goes the whole discussion connecting Yud Aleph Nissen, Yud Aleph Shvat, Tavshin Yud Aleph, connecting it all. It's pretty fascinating, all the connections. But the thing I want to focus on is something there at the end of the Sikha, where the Rebbe speaks about the Rebbetzин's name, Chaim Mushka. And the Rebbe says, in making a Dira B'Tachtenim, there's two aspects. One is what I said earlier. One is to take the raw elements and create a shelter. You can't live in the street. There's the elements, rain, snow, cold, and so on. Wild animals, strangers. So you need shelter. You need a home. I'm talking about a physical Dira, a physical home. The second thing you need is a beautiful home. You can live in a barn, and it's also a shelter, but it's not a beautiful home. And the Rebbe says the man takes the raw elements, as I said before, and turns the basic minimum. And a woman, as captured in the words names Chaya and Mushka, captures the real transformation of this hostile world, and not just taming it, not just surmada, but asay tev. What's the asay tev? So the word Chaya means vitality, life, Chayas. And Mushka, the Rebbe explains, comes from the word muscat. It's a perfume. It was one of the 11 spices used in the Beis HaMikdash, called mushka, musak, referring to spice. And the Rebbe says, the two things that beautify a home, and thus, as the Gemara says, Dira Noah turns the home into a beautiful place, is one is the energy and vitality in the home. You could have a home, and God forbid it's like a dead home, spiritually dead. And you could have a home that does not have an aroma, a perfume, a scent, which is the vibes of a beautiful home. Those are the two things that the woman contributes. And the Rebbe said this is not secondary. It's not like the main thing is the shelter, and this is just, okay, you know what, beautifying it. This actually captures the real essence, a dira noah, not just to have God comfortable in this world. I'm sorry, not just to have a place where God rests in this world, but a place that God is comfortable in the world. This is another recurrent theme, that women have a chush to make people more comfortable. Men, whether it's due to their fragile egos, and you could determine that in your own life, if that's the case or not, since there are none of them here, I'm the only one, so... but I'm repeating what the Rebbe said here, not my ideas, so... whether it's due to their fragile egos, whether it's due to other things, you know, like they say, a man may wear the pants in the family, but the woman tells him which pants to wear. So whatever reason it may be, but for some reason, women have the gentler attitude. And the Rebbe makes this a very serious and fundamental principle when he talks about chinuch and limud HaTorah and leadership, always the focus on the gentleness, on the nurturing quality. Now this does not mean that men cannot be nurturing, and does not mean we can't expect them to be. We're talking about what comes more natural. As I said, there's overlap. Both are necessary. This is not about one or the other. The natural element of being able to be. That's why you don't find that it says anywhere that the man is ikar habayis. You only say akeres habayis. Now why would that be the case? Why can't you say the woman is the foundation in her way, and the man is in his own way? He brings plenty, contributes. Nevertheless, as the Rebbe once spoke in a Sikha about Megillas Esther coming up Purim, very often the Rebbe would say, why is it called Megillas Esther? Mordechai had no role. Even if you say he wasn't as important, so you should have called Megillas Esther and Mordechai. Or Megillas Mordechai and Esther. Why is it called only Megillas Esther? There's no name Mordechai mentioned even. Imagine if it was the other way around. And the Rebbe says, because it's true, whatever Esther did, she listened to Mordechai, but the bottom line, it was the woman that implemented, and it's the woman that was able to transform this material world into a ruchnis dik home for the Eibishter. And from all these sikhs, what you come away with is, it's the opposite of what everyone begins with thinking. You know, men are important and women are their accessory. Actually, for many sikhs, it appears clearly there's the opposite way. That woman is the ikar and the men are the accessories. And I say that openly. You can look in the sikhs and you see it again and again and again. So I was thinking about this because recently, in the past few years, there have been some studies made, scientific studies, and not that we need any endorsement of the Rebbe's ideas, but when you see it in the world that is starting to understand certain ideas, it's a tremendous validation. It's like so I just wrote down a few things I want to read to you. And it's literally, when you read it, you mamish see the words of the Rebbe come alive that the Rebbe said in 1950, 51, 52, before this topic was even on the table. So first of all, there's a whole bunch of books and articles coming out that are state following. It's a little shocking, but you can stand it. It goes to the extreme. One of them is called Our Father is Necessary. Another book is called The End of Men. Okay? I hope you're not laughing in agreement, but these are books out there. Okay? Then there's one biology professor puts it this way, very bluntly. I'll jump to the end. If all men on earth died tonight, the species could continue. If the women disappear, it's human extinction. And scientists show that that's quite possible. Then there are studies that show that all children born are born feminine. And after 8 weeks, the chemicals turn some of them into men, which essentially makes men into mutations. I just hope you don't use this in the wrong way. Now, I'm not suggesting that anything I read here is what the Rebbe says. Obviously, Zocher Nekeva Bora Esam, and men are as equal partners. But it's interesting, the main thing what I wanted to read was the okay. Around the 8th week in the womb, certain hormones surge through male brains, killing cells in some regions called communications. That's what it says. And growing cells in others called aggression. By the time they're 3 months old, girls are on average, this is from a book called The Feminine Brain, which documents certain studies. It's not a theory. By the time they're 3 months old, girls are on average are much better at making eye contact with other people and picking up information from faces. During play, girls look back at their mothers on average 10 to 20 times more than boys do to check for emotional signals. Girls can also on average hear a broader range of sounds in the human voice and can better discern changes in tone. Later, girls are much more likely to use sentences that begin with let's while playing. Let's do this or let's do that. They are more likely to take turns. As a result, girls are inclined to pursue certain goals, for example, to forge connection and to create community. In other words, to build a home. This is a quotation from a secular scientist, neuropsychiatrist called Luan Brizendine in this book called The Feminine Brain. Now, again, we don't need necessarily endorsement, but this is written in secular, contemporary language. It literally mirrors the Rebbe's words. Obviously not with the extremes. She doesn't write about any inferiority of men. But when you read Sikhs, I remember there's a Sikh, I can't remember when it was I think in 1991, the Rebbe spoke about women with Shabbos Shira. And the Rebbe spoke, why is Kel B'Isha, you're not supposed to listen to a woman sing? And the Rebbe turned the whole thing around. Couldn't believe it. The Rebbe said, because song is Gaguyim. Gaguyim means yearning. And who yearns more and who is more intimate in their yearning? A woman. So her voice is far more intimate than a man's voice. Instead of we usually hear tznius as being a negative, as being a bad thing, an ugly thing, provocative, etc., seductive. Instead, the language of Chassidus, tznius is hatzna lechasim Hashem elakecha, the pasuk. It's dignity. And the inner dignity of a human being is who controls that, a woman much more than a man. This is numbers and numbers of sikhs. So then when you hear the word a home, today, oh, you're a homemaker. Who was it that one of the rabbis got up and spoke to these feminists? And, they were like really aggressive and they were going to attack him for being dominating over his wife. So then they asked him, what does he do? So he said, him and his wife, they run a home for unwanted children. So suddenly all these feminists got really, really impressed. Wow, that's beautiful. He says, yeah, it's our own children. No one else wants them. So the point is that the home has gotten a bad rap, but at the end of the day is the center of life. And when the Rebbe speaks about women being leaders, he says, makes it very clear, it's not a contradiction. It's extending the nurturing element of the home to the community, basically. It's extending it because every shliach and shlucha are not just responsible for their own children, they're responsible for an entire community. And the woman's touch is the necessary feminine touch that allows to create an environment that isn't just teaching, isn't just informative, but also adds that element. And the Rebbe once said the famous story with Eliyahu Hanavi when he was waiting for the Eibishter to come. So first came a great wind, and he thought the Eibishter was in the great wind. Then came a great thunder. No, it's also not barash, le baruach, le barash. Then came a great fire, a lightning, le be'esh. Where did the Eibishter appear? Kel d'mamadako, in a gentle, soft voice. And the Shalach, Siddur brings from the Shalach that those three are masculine forms. Ruach refers to blazen von sich, that you're expressive. Rash, there's noise, light. It's a fireworks show. Kel d'mamadako is silent. And what is greater, silence or sound? So in this aggressive material world, everyone measures things by quantity. Whatever is louder, whatever is more powerful. But in the world of emes, what's most powerful is things that are invisible. You probably all know the story where the woman, there was a shlucha that came to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe would always ask her what she's doing for her community. And the woman said, the Rebbe says, you're a partner, you should be helping, not just helping your husband, you're equal partners. She says she does what she can do, but I have to admit that when people come to see me, they come to our homes, they always compliment my husband. They never compliment me. Even though I do, I think, more work than he does in the home, preparing for Shabbos and so on. So the Rebbe smiled and said to her, it's true, people should be thanking you, but you have to remember we live in a superficial world. And in a superficial world, people value superficial things. When you come to a house, what do you compliment? You compliment the furnishings, the chandeliers, the cutlery, the things you see, the paintings on the wall. You never hear someone say, the Rebbe tells her, wow, what a powerful, invincible foundation this building rests upon. Because nobody sees foundations, and they don't value it. But it's the foundation. The Rebbe again said, that doesn't mean they shouldn't compliment. So, but the Rebbetzin told me on the phone then, that the light does not burn out at night. And the Rebbe explains it in a number of places. Why the night? Because night is when people are not around. Everybody's asleep. By day, you see a lot of masculine energy around. You see a lot of aggressive energy. Everybody's showing off. Ruach, Rash, Eish, a lot of things happening. When you want to see who's holding up the world, you look at night. When everybody's asleep at the wheel or wherever they're asleep at, and you see, that's why they sit with Balai Leneda. The Rebbe said those words. And I can tell you, though we can't analyze a Rebbe, but the Rebbe was a night person. People know today that the Rebbe rested mostly right in the beginning of the morning, but he was always up all night. And we could see this. I remember many times working late at night and walking home 4 o'clock in the morning, and the Rebbe's lights were on in his room. We only knew this after the Rebbetzin passed away, because before that the Rebbe went home. But then the Rebbe lived in 770, so you saw the lights on. And I always think it was always marveled when the whole world was asleep. The Rebbe's lights are burning. What was going on inside the room, you can only guess. But you have a man who was awake when everybody else was asleep. I don't just mean it physically. One of the Chassidim writes that the Rebbe once told him that some people sleep at a fabrengen with their eyes closed, and most sleep with their eyes open. And the Rebbe came, and the Rebbe at his side to wake us up. And I want to conclude with a critical story that the Rebbe told, and a number of times, which I think, you talk about empowerment of women, this is, in my opinion, maybe the cornerstone of it all. So you all hear that when Mashiach comes, it's going to be Nekeva to save of Goved. the feminine will rise. And the Rebbe makes it clear we are now at that stage. Why? Because as I said earlier, in earlier parts of history, what was revealed was what you saw with your eyes. What was the most powerful army? The one with the most soldiers, with the greatest firepower. Today, it's all subtle, it's all invisible. The most power is in nuclear energy that is invisible. The feminine energy that was always remained under the surface today is emerging. People value the invisible today. DNA, subcellular, subatomic particles, and so on and so forth. So it's not that inconceivable to understand that after years and years of so-called male masculine energy maybe taming the world, that we're at a point where we're coming to reveal the intimate energy, the divine intimate energy that makes everything tick. The foundation that's invisible to the eye. So on Tov Chai, this was Shabbos Pasha Shmini. I'm specifically telling you the date and so on because I think it's a must read for every Shliach HaShluchos. It's one of the most powerful sichos of the Rebbe about Shlichus. So briefly, the Rebbe speaks there how Shlichus is like going out to war. When you go out to war, there's a certain compelling sense of urgency where you can't sit around and make meetings and asifas and discussions. You're at war. You got to fight the war. And the Rebbe said the following story that's brought in Shivchei HaRizal, the Arizal. That it was a Friday out of Shabbos one day in Tzfas, the time of the Arizal, about 500 years ago. And the Arizal said to his students, let's go to Yerushalayim. Come, let's go to Yerushalayim. Everyone understood what he meant. It wasn't just for a sightseeing tour. We're going Mashiach, time for the Geulah. Some said that are ready to go, and some, as the Rebbe said they have to go back home to ask their wives. As soon as the Arizal heard that, he realized, he said, the time is not the time. So the Rebbe asked a medical question. That's the story. And Mashiach did not come then. The Rebbe said, what is this? Asking your wife, since when is that a problem? Since when can that hold up the Geulah? Sholem Bayis is the foundation of everything in Yiddishkeit. And suddenly the husbands will disappear and the wives will say, where are they? So they just didn't want to frighten them. They wanted to tell them or ask them. What's wrong with that? It's a respectful thing to do. And the Rebbe said, Eina Chanami Sholem Bayis is a big thing, but Mashiach is even bigger. And that when it comes, and Mashiach, the Rebbe says, it's time to go to Yerushalayim, the wives would have all understood that you should have gone and not come home to tell me about it. Because everyone obviously would have gone after that. And the Rebbe said these following words. He said, Sholem Bayis Taka Kibud Aveim is also a big thing. Some people say, I got to go ask my mother and my father. The Rebbe said, what kind of army can we fight when the soldiers have to ask their mother in the morning whether they should go out to fight? So Kibud Aveim is one of the Seres Adibris. But the Rebbe said, it's against the Melchama Hotas nicht. To go to war, you got to have a certain type of complete avekle. And then the Rebbe continued. He said, though they'll be there probably at the Fabring, and the Rebbe said, some Bali Nigla, we're going to have a problem with this, because that's like his kashas to the Rebbe. So he says, you could rely that Arizal knew Nigla too, and he knew halacha, and no way that he would be machshil his students to do something hepech hateva. And they knew that also. That's why that was their mistake. Okay, that was that sikh. Then the Rebbe, a few years later, said the following. He's told the same story, and he said, the next time around, it's going to be different. Just like we know that when the Eibishter spoke to Adam, he told him about Eitz Hadas, and then Adam shared it with Chava. So the Medrash says that that was the problem. Had he spoken to Chava first, the Eibishter, they wouldn't have all these issues. That's why by Matan Torah, what happened by Matan Torah is that the Eibishter said to Moshe, okay, same with the Beis Yaakov, go speak to the women first. Another question, what was the Havamina and what was the consideration, but that's the story. So the Rebbe said that when Mashiach comes this time around, he's not going to go to the men, he's going to go to the women. So the Rebbe said in the Fabrein, and he's saying right now, up front, the Rebbe says that the women should be fated, should not go ask their husbands. And they should march, and I guarantee you, the Rebbe says, I take responsibility that the men will come running after you. The Rebbe said this in the Fabrein, and I think it captures the essence. Chaz v'sholem doesn't mean hepech of sholem bayis, God forbid. We're talking about the dedication. And I've no doubt that the Rebbe is speaking 3 times a year to the women. Right before Rosh Hashanah, right before Shavuos, right after Shavuos. 3 times a year. That was the Rebbe, the leader, speaking straight to the women, not through the men, demonstrating the Kesem of the Beis Yaakov, the power of the feminine energy. So, if everyone that Rebbe appointed as leaders, Shluchos, Shlog, and Kamesei, there's no question that the women have not just another role, or even an equal role, but have in some ways even a predominant role. A predominant role because of the keiches the Eibishter gave you. And I can tell you the last year of the Rebbe Sichos, every Shabbos Kamat, every Shabbos the Rebbe mentioned, B'schus Noshim Tzidkonius, in the merit of the righteous women of our generation, we were redeemed from Mitzrayim. And since this generation is a Gilgal, a reincarnation from that generation, the same will be now. So, thank you for your time. As I said at the outset, Noshim Tzidkonius that you are. And though it's 20 years from Gimel Tammuz, the responsibility today is even stronger because we don't have the Giluyim where we could just schlep somebody to the Rebbe in a physical sense of the word. So now the responsibility on Shluchim and Shluchos, like yourselves, is far greater. And because the Rebbe gave you those keiches, the Rebbe gave you those blessings and empowerment, not just in your own homes and families, but to be true leaders in the right Torah way, in the halacha way, in the dignified way. But it's revealing the intimate Eid Ein Sof of Atzmus, that in many ways is even deeper than the Eid Ein Sof, the divine revelation that's revealed through the masculine dimension. And as the Rebbe says very clearly, Shechina is Malchus. Malchus, root of Malchus goes higher than the root of the Zohar, of the male. Malchus is the moon. The moon seems weaker than the sun, but it is the moon that Jews are compared to, and it's the moon that we sanctify, not the sun. Because physically the sun is stronger, but spiritually the moon is stronger. Because the voice of silence and the inner intimate voice, Chel Momadako, is a far greater voice. And what she writes, what I just read, that women have the ability to discern, even in a voice, the tone, is just a reflection of that. So the Eibishter should help you all in this Kinus HaShluchos, Schus of Noshim Tzidkonius. I thank my wife for organizing this in this particular. So please give her a proper hand. And the Schus of this Kinus, that we should already be Zeich as the Rebbe's Shliach with Eser Keiches, the Shliach with the 10 faculties equals Mashiach. As the Rebbe concluded in Bos Legani, the first Bos Legani, that we should be Zeich as Zenzich with the Rebbe Dolamata, Masorat Fachim, Behu, Yigaleinu. Thank you.